It is Orctober, so you know what that means. Today we are going to be painting up a green skin. Now, when I was deciding what to paint today, I looked through my 3,500 points of orcs and goblins that I have for the old world. I looked through some old Rogue Trader and 40k orc miniatures I've got, and a collection of different orc and goblin miniatures from other sculptors. But then an idea struck me. Very soon there is going to be a big release from Games Workshop, and part of that is a lovely green skin fella. Now, I didn't want to paint the one that's coming in the box, so I decided to print out something different, and that's going to be what we're painting today. Hello everybody, and welcome to Weekend Wargaming. My name's Alex, and I'm thrilled to have you here with me today. In this video, we're going to be paying a tithe to Hashut as we paint up this retro-style Hobgoblin Musician from Fabelzel Miniatures. Let's get to it. The model we're painting today is a Traitor Goblin, sculpted by Fabelzel and printed on my Elegoo Saturn 4 Ultra. What we're going to need for this is a 25mm round base, not a square one, and you're going to see why in the later videos, and then a piece of a cork placemat from IKEA. Once we've glued it down, we'll just break off the edges to give us a nice rocky texture. And then I decided after breaking this down that it was still sitting a bit too high, so what I did is I cut half of it off with a knife, broke up that straight edge, and then stuck the model directly on top. And as well as that, I had a little 3D printed skull that I stuck on the front, as you can see here. And now he's ready for priming. For the primer, we used AK Interactive's Fine Black, and then a heavy overspray of Fine Grey, leaving the black in the deepest shadows. Now our first colour here is going to be Imperial Fist's yellow contrast paint. This is going to give us a super bright base to work from. And this is one of the reasons for giving that light grey, almost white primer, is we can get that nice vintage look of super bright colours. And this Imperial Fist yellow does a great job of that. And we're going to stick 2 coats of this down in the end. When it's finished, you should get this nice super bright finish. Once we are happy with our yellow, we're going to start on our reds, and for that we're going to use Barl Red, again from Citadel Contrast range. Now we need to work really carefully here. These contrast paints are great for base coating, but if some of this red bleeds onto the yellow, it's going to be really hard to cover it up. We'd need to take the yellow back to the white to be able to use that Imperial Fist contrast again. So as we're painting the hat, the straps, the drum, and the beater of the drumstick, we're going to be super careful not to bleed over onto those yellow edges. If you do, you can touch it up, but go as slowly and as carefully as you need here and work cleanly to avoid extra work in the line. Moving on to the skin now, and we're going to use my favourite orc skin recipe, so that's going to start with Alga Green from AK Interactive's 3rd Gen line. And again, be nice and careful here as you go around, just picking out those skin details, being careful not to bleed over onto your Barl Red or your Imperial Fist Yellow. Our first wash is going to be Athonian Camo Shade from Citadel. Now what you want to do here is apply this all over the skin areas and making sure it gets into all of the cracks and crevices of this lovely sculpt. Go around the entire model, painting this in everywhere, and if any does sit down too heavily, you can just wick it back up with a dry brush. Once that's dry, we're going to come back in with our next wash, which is going to be Seraphim Sepia, again from Citadel. And this we're going to paint just into the recesses of our nice yellow cloak here. Again, take your time, and if you do put down too much, you can just wick away the excess. Our first highlights are going to be Flashkit's Yellow from Citadel, and we're going to apply this to all of the raised areas of the yellow cloak, helping us pull out that detail even more and giving our model some nice interesting visual contrast. Jumping back over to the skin now, and we're going to take Golden Olive from AK Interactive's 3rd gen line, and we're going to brush this over on the raised areas of the skin, just the same as we did the cloak. Now, to be honest, I don't know why I did this instead of the skin first, as I usually work skin up, but hey ho, it doesn't matter, I was just in the flow of things and enjoying myself. As I mentioned, we're just going to put this on the raised areas and upward facing surfaces to bring some contrast to this lovely sculpt. The last part of my orc skin recipe is Radiant Yellow, again from AK Interactive's 3rd gen line. Now, we want to be super careful with this and just pick out the most pronounced areas and the most raised areas where it would get the most light. We want our highlights here to be thinner than the previous step so we can see the gradient build up all the way through. And you want to really take your time here. I've sped this footage up, I'm absolutely not working this fast. Just take your time, relax, enjoy it, and before you know it, you'll have some lovely detailed skin. As you can see, we've built some nice gradients on this skin, so now it's time to move on to our next step. And for that, we're going to black out the eyes using Black Legion from Citadel Contrast. Again, take your time here, and I apologise for the blurry footage. The camera decided to focus on my knuckle instead. But what we're going to do is completely fill in the whole of the sculpted eye with the black. What we're going to do after that is come in with our bright red colour, and for this we're going to use Evil Sun's Scarlet, but that black is going to give us a nice border around to help separate out those surfaces. Take your time, layer it in, and if you need to, you can go back to your black to touch it up. Now, as I mentioned at the start of the video, this Hobgoblin that we're painting today is part of a wider project. So if you want to follow along with that, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And whilst you're down there, please like this video. It really does go a long way into helping spread the channel around to new viewers. As I mentioned at the start of the video, this Hobgoblin is going to be part of a wider project that I'm really excited to show you about. For now, I'll give you one clue, which is this guy will be painted next. So if you want to see what this project is, and if you're liking this video, please do subscribe to the channel, hit that like button. It really does help the channel grow. But for now, let's get back to the painting. Once we've done that, we're going to start shading. So for all of our red details here, we're going to come in with Agrax Earthshade, and we're going to mix it a little bit down with water. What I found is with these new recipe shades, they're kind of glossy, and actually later it's going to become a bit of a problem that we're going to have to deal with some matte varnish. But to avoid having to do that, just make sure you thin down your wash. If you have the old recipe, good on you. It still can be a little bit glossy, so thin it down still just a little bit. Moving on from that, we're going to take Smoke Black from AK Interactive, and we're going to put this on the undercloth that you can see kicking out between the robes, and we're also going to put it on the wraps of the arms and then his hair. And whilst that smoke black is drying, let's use some deck tan, again from AK Interactive, and paint on the toenails. Now where we applied the wash before, you should have some nice lines in between the actual sculpted details, so try not to cover that over like I did just here by applying it a bit too quickly and a bit too heavily. Take your time, it will save you a little job later. Now, as well as the nails, we're going to pick out the stitching, and this is going to help the model stand out a little bit and just provide a little bit more contrast. So, as I said, we'll apply it to the stitching on the hat here, and there's also the stitching on the belly. Once that's finished, we'll move on to our drumstick and our drum head. As I was finishing up the drumhead, I realised we hadn't actually painted the back of his jerkin yet. So whilst I had the deck tan on the palette and on my brush, I decided the back of the jerkin was going to be deck tan. Now, it wouldn't be a miniature painting video if we didn't crack out everybody's favourite Nuln oil from Citadel. This is my favourite black wash, and this is still the old recipe, so it dries a bit more matte. And we're going to apply this to all of the areas that we painted with that smoke black earlier. So that's the fabric that sticks out from between the robes, his arm wraps, and his hair. Our next wash is Seraphim Sepia, and we're going to apply this to all the areas that we just painted with the deck tan. So that's the drum head, the drumstick, in between the toenails, and the back of the jerkin. And I decided that the wash didn't quite darken down the drum head enough, so I reloaded the brush and I came back in and gave it a heavier coat to give us a bit more of the skin effect that I wanted. Now, as I mentioned earlier, at this point I wasn't happy with how glossy the model was looking after all the washes, so I gave it a quick spritz of AK Ultra Matte from my airbrush. Once that had dried, I made a 50-50 mix of Flushkit's Yellow and Screaming Skull, and I started to do the finer edge highlights on the cloak. Now we're going to use the same approach here that we did with the skin, using thinner lines than our previous highlight step, just to pick out the highest details and the ones that would see the most light. You don't need to do this, but this is going to help your models stand out when you're looking at them from arm's length at the tabletop. Next up, we're going to do the same using Scarlet Red from AK Interactive, and we're going to pull out the sharp details of all of our red areas. So that's the hat, the drum, the straps, and the top of the drumstick. As I was finishing up highlighting the red here, I realised that I'd left off the tips of his ears, so a quick bit of radiant yellow for that, before coming in with deck tan to highlight the edges of the drum skin and to add a few scratches to the surface, as well as highlighting the drumstick itself. Our next highlight is going to be English Grey from AK. Now, sorry again for the lack of focus here, my camera decided that my knuckle was much more interesting than what we were painting. Now, in hindsight, this should probably have been a second highlight step, because this is really starkly contrasting that base colour. But in the end, I didn't mind it. So anywhere that we painted the smoke black earlier, we're going to come in and we're just going to edge highlight with a really bright contrasting highlight from this English grey. And now we want to give our eyes a little bit more detail, and I apologise for the focus of the camera again. I realise my thumbnails are not the point of interest here, or my knuckles. But basically what we're doing is taking Flushkit's Yellow, and like we would paint in an iris on a normal human model, we're painting in the yellow here for our lovely goblin. Once we've done that, take some Retributor armour from Citadel and just paint the rivets of the drum head here. He also has a few earrings that I managed to somehow not film painting, but also paint those with the Retributor. Okay, and now we come to what might be my favourite part of painting this model, and that is black lining. So this is a technique that painters used to use back in the day before washes and things like that, and it would help the different areas of the model stand out. So what we're going to do is use Black Legion contrast paint here, as it's nice and thin, and we're going to paint very thin lines with a very fine tip brush where two different surfaces meet. So you can see here where the stitches in the jerkin are. We've also painted between the side of the hat, the drumsticks here, between the ears and the sides of the hat. Anywhere where two surfaces meet on the model, paint in a very, very thin, very fine black line, and we'll get that retro look that we're aiming for. Onto the final stretch of this paint job, and we're going to use Black Legion contrast paint from Citadel just to black out the entire base and use as a foundation for our dry brushing to build those rocky textures, and then we're going to paint in a little bit of lava as well. So we'll carefully put this everywhere, being sure not to spill over onto any of our other painted parts before coming in with our first dry brush. Now this is going to be very light, and we're going to use English Grey from AK Interactive. If you're not sure how to dry brush, basically you want to put a small amount on one of these special dry brushes, wick most of it off onto a piece of dry kitchen paper, and then gently brush over your details. And what you'll find is that thin layer of paint just goes on to our top layers. The next dry brush is going to be English Grey and white mixed 50-50. We're going to do this even lighter than before. Now, actually here I put a little bit too much down, but it's not so much of a bother because we're going to come in later with a glow that's going to cover that up. But to build that up first, we need to start painting our lava. So we're going to use Burning Ore from the Army Painter Fanatic range as our base, and we're going to put this all over the raw base areas where the cork is not. I hope that makes sense. In front of the cork. Next up, we're going to take Mephiston Red from Citadel, and we're just going to brush the line in between where the cork meets the base, giving us our shadow and our dark area of the lava as we start to build up some gradients in the colours. Next up, we're going to take a mix of Burning Ore and Mephiston Red, and we're going to paint the middle area. And as much as we can here, we want to work quick with wet paints to help us blend. So as you can see now, whilst the paint's still wet, I'm taking Jokero Orange from Citadel, and I'm applying that as a thicker layer over the edge, keeping those first two gradients there. And again, whilst this paint is still wet, I'm going to get back onto my palette, and I'm going to use some Glowing Inferno from Army Painter's Fanatic range, and I'm going to start brushing this onto the end, and you can see that I'm adding in this texture. By the way, I'm almost stippling with the side of my brush. This is just going to give us a little bit of texture, give us some detail with the lava. Then, using the same technique but lighter, let's use some Flush Gits Yellow over the edge to start bringing out a bit of a highlight. Once that's done, we're going to paint the skull that we definitely didn't forget about because we were too excited to paint the lava with some Deck Tan from AK. And just thin this a little bit so we don't clog up those fine details of our 3D printed skull. Once it's dried, we need bone colour, and for that there's nothing better than Skeleton Horde Contrast from Citadel. Apply this as one thick coat as you would with any other contrast paint. Then allow it to dry before moving on to the next step. What we're going to do here is really lightly dry brush with our Burning Ore from Army Painter's Fanatic just on the areas that are facing the lava, and it's going to give us a very quick, very cheap OSL style glow. Once you're happy with your glow effect, it's time to paint the base rim, and for me I use Black Legion contrast paint. Apply this in a few thin layers and allow it to dry in between, and when you do, you'll have a lovely, smooth finish. Whatever colour you decide to paint your base rim, once it's done, set it down, let it dry, and then enjoy looking at your beautifully painted Traitor Goblin from Fabelzel Miniatures. What a beauty. Thank you so much for sticking around with me to the end of the video. I had a really good time painting this guy, and I hope that you enjoyed the journey too. I've mentioned a few times now that this is actually part of a much bigger project, and I'm really excited to show that to you. I've given you a few clues today, so if you have any ideas of what we're going to do, write them down in the comments and we'll see in a few weeks if you are indeed correct. Whilst you're there, if you have any other ideas of videos you'd like to see me make, please let me know and I'll try and get around to them in the future. But until then, stay safe, be good to one another, and happy wargaming.